Hello, thanks for joining me. I'm the Badger Reborn, and today I'm going to rank the 10 best villains in the Wheel of Time series. This ranking is just my opinion, of course, but my opinion is objectively right, so keep that in mind as you watch. I'm not using any exact rubric, but I am basing this off of a few primary factors. First, I enjoy villains that I feel strongly about. Hate them, fear them, be disgusted by them, or even enjoy them. I like villains that elicit a strong emotional response. Second, they have to have a pretty large role in the series. For example, I enjoy the character of Pytar the Dark Friend, but he doesn't have a very large role, although it is larger than I realized on my first read. Finally, I need to like their storyline. There are some villains who have large roles and some fans really enjoy, but I just don't really like their actions that much, don't find their plot that interesting, or don't really like their backstory. Villains who are too generic don't really do it for me, whereas unique villains are the ones I find most interesting, and they really work. This video will have spoilers for the whole series. If you haven't finished it yet, get to work. I'll still be here when you're done. I also just wanted to give a quick warning that I will talk about some graphic things in this video, all of which are mentioned in the Wheel of Time books. Keep in mind that you're definitely going to disagree with some of my choices, and that's okay. It's actually a great thing. Let me know in the comment section which ones you agree or disagree with, and we can talk about it more in my Discord. So let's get started. The 10th best villain in the Wheel of Time is Aginor. He shows up in the Eye of the World and looks very gruesome, but the part of his story I really enjoy the most is when he's reborn as Osingar and disguises himself as Shiva and joins and spends a lot of time with Rand. Rand randomly picked Shiva at Dumai's Wells to be one of his guards, and Shiva was clearly shocked. Shiva seems to have his head in the clouds all the time, and Rand thinks that he might be going mad, which is a little ironic. At first I thought this was just an act that Shiva was putting on, but I'm starting to think it might just be really Aginor's real personality. Later on, he commands Dommer Flynn to heal Rand, which I find quite funny. He also protects Rand when they're fighting the Shanchan, and Rand's using Kalendor. I quite enjoy the fact that Aginor does more than almost any other character to keep Rand alive throughout the Wheel of Time. What drags Aginor down for me is that he has a pretty generic beginning, and also that he doesn't last a super long time, so a little bit less time to be interesting. It's also a little bit ironic that he gets killed by a Dark Friend. Next up, at number 9, is Sevanna. This might be a controversial one, because she causes what a lot of fans, including me, view as some of the less interesting plotlines. However, I think she has a really great story. Everything that happens with the Shido, including things we see before the story, happened due to Sevanna's ambition and leadership. She wanted a lot of power, so she married Suladric, who was the clan chief of the Shido at that time. When Suladric died, Sevanna started flirting with Couladin and his brother Moghedien, convincing both that she loved them and that they were the only one that she truly loved. When Moghedien dies in Rodion, Sevanna convinces Couladin that he was the only one she really loved. Sevanna is really the brains behind the Shido rise to power, not Couladin. Later on, Sevanna convinces the Shido Wise Ones to murder one of their number. This gives her a lot more authority. She again convinces them to use the One Power in battle, and even later on, after being defeated at Dumai's Wells and tricked by Samael, she manages to maintain control and authority over the Shido, which is pretty impressive. In some ways, I even enjoy the end of the Shido arc. Sevanna basically becomes lazy in Malden, surrounded by servants and jewels. She's essentially not even Aiel at this point, given how much of the culture she has thrown away, and yet she's still able to maintain that authority. To top it all off, she's not even a Dark Friend. Sevanna's never really been interested in the Shadow, and I like that. It adds a fairly unique element to her arc as a villain. However, despite these good parts of her story, Sevanna's arc does sputter a little bit at the end, especially after Dumai's Well. She becomes a little bit less interesting as a character, so she doesn't move up higher in the rankings. Next up, we move on to number 8, which is Elaida, the other non-Dark Friend on the list. She's even less of a true villain than Sevanna is. While both are power-hungry and selfish, Elaida is actually trying to defeat the Shadow actively, and that's what makes her such an interesting villain to me. Most of Elaida's actions are things that she believes are necessary for the light to triumph over the Shadow. Prior to the Eye of the World, Elaida had a foretelling that the royal line of Andor would be the key to winning the last battle. She moved to Andor to nurture Morghese and Elaine, which is actually a pretty similar motivation and character arc to what Moraine starts out with at the beginning of the Eye of the World, and what she's been doing since New Spring. The difference, however, is that Elaida was also motivated by ambition. She wanted it to be her, specifically, who provided a key to winning the last battle. A lot of people forget, too, that the Elaida we see for most of the series is not really her natural personality. She had been meeting with Padan Fain in the tower, and he influenced her just like he did with Pedron Nile, bringing out the worst of her personality and kind of burying the good parts. So her selfishness, pride, and ambition, as well as paranoia, really came to the surface, along with an irrational hatred of Rand. Plus, Elaida was part of some of the most interesting plotlines in the story, including Rand in the box and Egwene as the Amerlin in the tower. These wouldn't happen without Elaida being such a great villain. She also has a really satisfying ending, which is not the same for all of these villains. I think it's even actually a little bit extreme for someone who wasn't even serving the Shadow. On this list, Elaida would be even higher if she wasn't such a pain to read sometimes. The things that make her great also make her unbearable. The seventh best villain is Lanfear. Lanfear is fascinating in a lot of ways, and easily the weirdest villain on the list. She has the most significant backstory, being the one who opened the Dark One's prison, and she's probably the most well-known Forsaken to the characters in the story. Lanfear was even able to choose her own Forsaken name, which none of the others were allowed to do. Despite these origins, Lanfear was not much of a leader among the Forsaken, and spent a lot of the series jealously pining over Rand. She loved Lews Therin, or at least thought she loved him, and she transfers this obsession to Rand as well. One of the things I enjoy most about Lanfear is that she's such a terrible actor. When she's disguised as Selene, she's constantly revealing information that she shouldn't be able to have, and even Rand becomes suspicious, despite being nearly blinded by her beauty. At one point, she even almost forgets the cover story she has for this information, which was reading it from a book. Lanfear is the first villain on this list who ever really made me fear for the main characters. Since she was so crazy, her actions are hard to predict, and even though she saves Rand a number of times in the series, I never quite felt sure what she was going to do. Similar to Deshiva, I really enjoyed the extreme number of times that Lanfear saves Rand's life throughout the story. I honestly think she might save Rand's life more times than any other character in the series, good or evil. The thing that keeps Lanfear from being higher on this list is her rather boring arc as Sindain, and in my opinion, pretty lame death. Up next at number 6 is Asmodean, who spends a lot of the time in the series with Lanfear. What makes Asmodean perhaps the most interesting is that he's hardly villainous at all. In fact, most of the time in the series he spends with Rand, and their chemistry is actually really entertaining to read. Like Lanfear, Asmodean's a pretty bad actor when he's pretending to be the gleeman Jason Natale. However, he's a little bit better than she is, and he does manage to trick Rand. Despite doing this, and successfully creating the Shido headache, Asmodean really fails to beat Rand at anything, even though he has a lot of time where he could have just left Rand, gone to Rodion, picked up the Chodan Call, and then dominated Rand. But he doesn't do it. Instead, Rand and Lanfear wipe the floor with Asmodean, and he becomes Rand's teacher, which is where the interest for Asmodean really kicks in. He's never really frightening to me, but he's actually fun. Whenever Rand says something that only Lews Therin would know, Asmodean gets really freaked out. When Rand was about to die in the Battle of Cairhien, Asmodean healed him. A lot of people believe that Asmodean was going to come back to the light and abandon the Dark One. I personally don't believe this. I think he was way too much of a coward. Out of all the Forsaken, Asmodean was definitely a top 2 coward in my opinion. I think he would have been vastly too terrified of the Dark One's retribution to make that kind of brave choice. His death also provided a lot of speculation. Spoiler alert, it was Graendal, and his time in the series was highly entertaining. So despite him hardly ever doing anything in the story to harm the heroes or really anyone, he's a fun villain, and he definitely makes this spot on the list for me. Before we move into the top 5, I wanted to take a moment to ask for you to give me a thumbs up on my video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I've also added a Patreon account, so if you'd like to support me, you can check that out. There are bonus features like discussing videos with me in advance and requesting upcoming topics. Thanks for the support and love. So we've reached the top 5 with Moghedien. Moggy gets a definite boost, and maybe a slightly unfair one, due to her association with Nynaeve, who's one of my absolute favorite characters. Their rivalry is so much fun, and their constant battles are really fantastic. The way Nynaeve wins the first battle, and you get such a confidence boost as Nynaeve and as the reader, is such a great way to kick off a great arc. Moghedien is a really cowardly Forsaken, even more so than Asmodean, which is really saying something. She's got to be the biggest coward in the whole story. However, she really comes to develop a huge grudge against Nynaeve, for obvious reasons. And I think this makes her story even more entertaining because their battles really mean something to both of them. When Moghedien rips Birgitte out of Tel'aran'rhiod, it's a stunning moment. When Nynaeve captures her and realizes that Moghedien is hiding out in Saladar, you cheer. Her time in Saladar was so tense, because you never really know what's going to go wrong for Nynaeve and Elaine. Turns out nothing. If most of these things don't sound too villainous, it's because they really aren't. Moghedien is highly entertaining and a great foil for Nynaeve, but she won't ally with the other Forsaken, she rarely engages in combat, and she doesn't really do much to harm most of the main heroes, or even the general population. Moghedien's true ability comes as a spy. She's actually a really great actor, unlike the other Forsaken, and is able to convincingly portray anyone, even a lowly servant. Though I really enjoy her, this lack of truly evil deeds keeps Moghedien outside of the top 4 for me. I think it's fitting that her pre-Forsaken job was an investment advisor. No offense to the investment advisors out there. Next up at number 4 is Graendal, who I view as possibly the most effective Forsaken overall throughout the story. Graendal is known for her love of pleasure and desire to appear seductive to others. However, in a really fascinating twist, we learn late in the story that she doesn't actually care that much about those things, and just uses them as a disguise, a screen, to make the other Forsaken underestimate her. And this works really well. This alone makes Graendal worthy of a top 5 spot, because it would be so generic to have a villain who's ruled by lust and controlled by pleasures, but Graendal is so much more complex than that. However, it doesn't stop there. Graendal spends a lot of the series in the background, doing minor plots which don't come up until later, or sometimes don't come up at all. It's really late in the story that Graendal begins to shine, after many of the other Forsaken have been killed off, which is just her style. Unlike the other Forsaken, Graendal is not a coward. However, she does know when and how to be cautious. She's also known for her skill with compulsion, which she uses to really great effect throughout the story. This leads to an amazing scene at Natrin's Barrow, and one of the best quotes of the series from Rand. One of the biggest wins in the series for Graendal is using compulsion on all the great captains before the last battle. This caused them to stealthily lose battles until the heroes finally caught on. This cost the armies of the light huge amounts of soldiers, time, and strategic positioning. She was also a terrifying fighter during the last battle, even using compulsion on Ruark, which leads to one of the most tragic scenes in the series when Avienda has to kill Ruark. Another interesting thing about Graendal is how many of the other Forsaken she kills, either directly like Asmodean or indirectly like Arengar. Some of the things that keep Graendal out of the top 3 for me are that she doesn't really do much in the first half of the story, and some of her plots are so far in the background that we never really find out what they were, so they don't lead to much except for kind of a vague sense that something sinister is happening. That brings us to the top 3. I think my number 3 selection is going to be a surprise to a lot of people, since most fans wouldn't even have this character in their top 3 or even their top 10. But the third best villain in the Wheel of Time is Davon Hanlon. Also known as Dorlin Malar, Davon Hanlon is a fairly high-ranking Dark Friend with no special powers. His backstory isn't well known. He got a woman pregnant, and when she accused him, he killed her and hid her body in a well. In Andor, Hanlon joins the White Lions, which are a mercenary group of fighters led by Robin. Later on, he leads the White Lions to join the rebels in Cairhien. Then he goes back to Andor by himself, and this is where his story really picks up. He stages an assassination attempt on Elaine, which he then disrupts and saves Elaine's life. As a result, Elaine promotes him to captain of her bodyguard. Hanlon uses this position to commit several acts to attempt to destabilize Caemlyn. He also sexually harasses several of the palace servants. Elaine never fully trusts him, and Hanlon definitely does not try to act like a righteous man. Additionally, he proves himself to be very dangerous, killing several men that were attempting to follow him multiple times. Later on, Hanlon stabs a pregnant Elaine when he gets discovered. In the same scene, he kills 2 Black Aja after realizing he cannot help them escape. He also steals a copy of the Foxhead Medallion from Elaine. During the last battle, in one of the most shocking scenes of the entire series, Hanlon cuts Brigida's head off. He's in the process of an even more gruesome act, cutting Elaine's babies out of her womb, when Brigida returns as a hero of the Horn and kills him. This is an extremely satisfying death for one of the most disgusting and loathsome characters of the entire series. One of the long-running themes of Hanlon's POV scenes is his desire to rape a queen, with Elaine being his intended victim. Every single Hanlon scene reeks of filth, and I want so badly for someone to murder him every time he's on the page. I can't stand reading his scenes, but in a good way, because he's so well written as a villain. Though he's not as major a character as many of the other villains, I think Hanlon's abhorrent nature, his great writing, and some of the major moments of the series, and doing this all without any special powers, earned Hanlon that spot on the list. Now we move on to the second best villain of the series, Mazrim Taim. Taim has nearly everything going for him as a villain. He has a unique origin story, being a false dragon. He has Rand's trust for a long time, leading the Black Tower. He's an extremely powerful channeler, and he even gains enough authority with the Shadow to be promoted to the rank of Chosen, the only character we see doing this. And he commits a lot of atrocious acts. Let me just go ahead and say that I think that turning someone to the Shadow against their will, which Taim does to many channelers, might be the most evil act in the entire series. Taking away someone's free will and forcing them to serve the Dark One is as low as it gets. It boils my blood to read these sections and realize what Taim is doing. He also does several other interesting things, including giving Rand a seal to the Dark One's prison, saving Rand's life from a Grey Man, although it's debatable what his real motivations were here, and training a lot of the Ashaman who eventually go on to help the Light. And of course, it cannot be forgotten that Taim is responsible for one of the best lines and scenes of the entire series, "Kneel, or you will be knelt." Before doing this ranking, I didn't realize that I had Taim so high. He even has a great death scene, dominating the last battle until he's taken down by Egwene in that epic scene. The only thing that hurts Taim is the fact that Rand didn't see right through him as a villain. I know that's not really Taim's fault, kind of what he's doing on purpose, but he could have been a little bit more inconspicuous so that me as a reader didn't see immediately through him and could tell that he was a villain. Finally, we've reached number 1, the best villain of the Wheel of Time mega series. At this point, you've no doubt realized that at least one villain that you love is going to be left off of my list. Like I said in the beginning, let me know who it is in the comment section and why you think they should be ranked so high. My next video will include some discussion of comments, and I'd love to read some from this section. Also, please share this video with other Wheel of Time fans. I also wanted to include 2 honorable mentions, Varen and Ingtar, who both serve the Shadow at times and definitely have blood on their hands. Varen has great intentions and is one of the most impactful characters at the end. Ingtar is a really shocking reveal, one of Robert Jordan's early triumphs as a writer, and he has an epic redemption scene as well. Since these two aren't really villains with their great endings and contributions to the light, I couldn't include them in the top 10, but I wanted to mention them. So, the number one best villain in the Wheel of Time is Padan Fain. Yep, the man who was around from the beginning, who is tainted in multiple ways, who helped the Shadow find Rand at the beginning, and has been around for the entire 14-book series, and was alive in New Spring. Fain was a Dark Friend before the Eye of the World, similar to Gollum, twisted by the Dark One to hunt Rand. He was even forced to hunt Rand to the extent of his physical capabilities. Then he entered Shadar Logoth, where he met Mordeth, who essentially fused with him, twisted the Dark One's essence, and created an entirely new villain, with unique motivations, intentions, and goals. Padan Fain causes more havoc and chaos throughout the story than any other character except Rand, including any other single Forsaken, and he does it without the ability to channel. Fain is still very dangerous, since his dagger can kill easily, and he may have enhanced speed and reflexes, but his main strengths are his intelligence and ability to use the Mordeth influence to twist the minds of people he interacts with. Fain uses this incredible effect in several ways. He twists the mind of Pedron Nile, causing him to lose his way and eventually be unseated, toppling the entire White Cluck structure and reducing their giant military to a single small army. Eventually, Galad gets it back together, but it's so reduced from what it was early in the series. He does the same with Toram Riotin, who causes a headache for Rand by helping to lead a rebellion against him. He taints Elaida in the White Tower, causing her to turn from a headstrong woman trying to serve the Shadow to a greedy and paranoid character who goes completely off the rails. It is even theorized that Fain influenced Egwene, causing her to distrust Rand on a smaller scale, but in a similar way to what Elaida, Riotin, and Pedron Nile did. Fain hates Rand with a passion. He brought the White Cloaks and Trollocs to the Two Rivers in an attempt to entice Rand there and to hurt him. He kills Perrin's entire family there. This leads to one of the best series of events in any of the books. Later on, Fain nearly kills Rand and Cairhien when he slices the ruby dagger across Rand's existing side wound. Only the presence of extremely skilled healers like Samitsu and Damer Flynn keep Rand alive, and the wound continues to trouble him. Fain commits a long list of vile and disgusting acts, including feeding people to Trollocs, raping and killing innocent civilians, and he even has one of the most jarring early scenes of the series when he nails a Murdrall to a door. His rogue nature ends up being helpful to Rand and the others in some ways too. For instance, he kills some of the rogue Ashman who Rand is hunting in Farmatting. At the end, Fain's involvement tails off a little bit, and his death scene is a little bit of a letdown, which is the only real flaw to his character. I hope the Amazon TV series is able to keep his involvement high and improve his death scene, because I think he's the most dynamic, unique, and interesting villain in the entire series. Robert Jordan had to get in character to write him, and it's really obvious when you read those sections, because you can just feel the filth coming off of the pages. Fain deserves this spot as the number one villain in the Wheel of Time. And that wraps up the top 10 list. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like and subscribe to the channel, and consider joining the Patreon. For those of you affected by coronavirus, me and everyone else in the Wheel of Time community is thinking about you. I hope these videos and the world that Robert Jordan created can be a comfort to you during these times. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.